Okay, so we're going to have our next speaker now, and he is a resident of Pôntegok near Brattleboro, Vermont, and he's immersed in the stories layered within this landscape. He serves as chair for the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs and is a public liaison and tribal historic preservation officer for the Elmu Abenaki, members of the contemporary Northeastern Native community. Rich
Holschuh.
Rich Holschuh is founder and co-director of the Kchi Project. His work draws upon history, linguistics, geography, and culture to share beneficial ways of seeing and being in relationship with place. Please welcome Rich Holschuh.
Hey, Kwayam. Hello, everyone. Delaware Sal, Dari Wantastagak, Dali Sukwakik, Kchi Pôntegok. We go down Nameolan, Pamlon Quick, Kitsio Leonie. My name is Rich. I'm called Rich, the name I am given. We are called by others. We do not exist on our own. We exist because of each other. We're in community. This is my father's name, so I have a direct connection to my father through that name. I am of mixed heritage, folks from all over the place, as many of us are. Holschuh, that awkward name, right? Holschuh, that's a German name, means wooden shoe. I could say I am of the wooden shoe people. And I heard Mark Charles, who was a Diné candidate for US president, introduce himself that way once because his mother is Dutch. He said, I'm of the wooden shoe people. So am I. My mother's family is a different story. Many very early settlers, French, Dutch, German, and Native people who are already here, original people. Okay. People who know more than I do. I speak to you in the Abenaki language, of which I am a student. It's the language of this land. I want to acknowledge the place where we gather here today. We are in the land of the Pennacook Abenaki people, a group among the Western Abenaki or Central Abenaki, as you want to distinguish that according to today's nomenclature. They speak the Abenaki language as well. It's a language in recovery. It's a language that's been here for a very, very long time, and it's the language that this land speaks. Language is a two-way communication tool. And when the land speaks this language, if you know this language, you can recognize it perhaps a little better than some others, and you can speak back. So what I'm here is to talk to you about this conversation, which is what petroglyphs represent. I come from further west, as Brattleboro, traditionally known as Wantastagok. Wantastagok is an Abenaki word, takes its meaning from the river that meets the Connecticut there. The Wantastuk meets the Quenetuk at Wantastagok, and it means the river where something is lost. And we believe now, as we recover these stories, that this refers to the petroglyph site there in Wantastagok. But I'm here to talk to you about one 20 miles upriver that we know as Kchi Pôntegok at today's Bellows Falls on the Vermont side, but Walpole on the New Hampshire side, because the river is not seen as a boundary. It is a unifying characteristic. And the petroglyphs are there not to separate us, to bring us together, the conversation. So in 2022, 2024, the National Park Service awarded a grant through the Underrepresented Communities Grant Program to a partnership formed with the town of Rockingham, which is the one that contains Bellows Falls. Bellows Falls is a village within Rockingham. Rockingham, Vermont, not New Hampshire. You notice here in New England, we share names often. We seem to have been at a loss for creativity. So we just took what we already knew and labeled it somewhere else, which is kind of a Western habit. Vermont Humanities was also a supporter of this project. So I was one of the co-directors representing the Akiôtloka tribe, one of the 4 Vermont state recognized groups, which have been in the news a lot if you watch your politics. And if you want to talk about that later, I'm happy to, because it's all political. I'm deeply involved in that as the chair of the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs. So I'm kind of up on it. But the land continues, the earth continues, the Abenaki people continue, and the petroglyphs are there. They've been there for a very long time, and they will be there for a long time, and they continue to speak. So I want to talk to you about that. So the Underrepresented Communities Grant Program through the National Park Service, which administers the National Register of Historic Places. I'm sure you've heard of all of these things, and there's acronyms all over the place. I may stumble over them a little bit, but we all do. So the National Park Service administers the National Register, which is a program to register significant places here in this country. Underrepresented Communities Grant Program proposes for communities which have not been well represented, and again, this is sort of a Western pattern of behavior, in that program, to give them a chance, to give them a leg up. These proposals, these nominations, these programs require that the property in discussion be eligible for the National Register. You can't just pick some random thing. You need to be aiming for the National Register, either in a new nomination or amending an existing nomination. So the Bellows Falls petroglyphs site on the archaeological maps is already a nomination on the National Register within a multiple resource area called the Bellows Falls Island, MRA. It is primarily industrial sites. If you've ever been to Bellows Falls, you'll recognize that there was an intense development of the water power there for mills, now used for hydro since the water-powered mills are obsolete. There just happens to be a petroglyph site surrounded by derelict mills. They were there first for similar but different reasons. So it ended up in the MRA. It's kind of lost there. Its documentation is purely through Western eyes. It's a very Western scientific approach. And what our team proposed to do through the Underrepresented Communities Grant was to lift that single nomination out and give it its own standalone status with cultural information for the first time on the record. Underrepresented Communities Grant, this is the landing page for the National Park Service program for this year, 2024, and our project depicted here is the poster child for this year's program, which is kind of an honor. So what we did with this team is the town of Rockingham at the village of Bellows Falls as the certified local government, CLG, they met the requirements for being an applicant to the National Park Service. You had to be one of several different categories. They were the category. They teamed up with the tribe of which I'm a citizen, and we brought on a professional archaeologist named Gail Golick, who lives in Walpole and knows the area well. And we proposed to take up this idea of why are the petroglyphs here, not just where they are and what they look like, but what are they all about? This is the town of Rockingham's webpage for the project. We're required to have publicity and available to the public to see where their tax dollars are going. You can go to their to this page if you want to, rockinghamvermont.org, Kchi Pôntegok. There's some images there. You'll see some of these again. And then this is the tribal approach. Kchi Pôntegok is a Abenaki word. It means Great Falls. It's how I refer to that place. Today, people call it Bellows Falls. Mr. Bellows came much later. Kchi is the first word. It means great. Very simply, it means great. Not as in size, although it can mean size, but it's more about its significance or importance. It is a great place. It really is. We refer to our elders as Kitsiak, the great ones. It's that kind of respect. And falls, the second word, Pôntegok, compound word. Pon means to fall or to go down. We see the same word in Penakuk, the people of this place. Penakuk, the people of the falling hill, at the place of the falling hill, which refers to up in Concord, up the river. We're downriver here at Amaskik or Namaskik on the Molomak, the Merrimack. You can see Abenaki continues. It's just changed a little bit. Other influences. And we approach the fact that the petroglyphs are at this special place because of what the place represents and what is being said about it when we're there. We decided to approach this through a methodology called traditional cultural landscapes, which is a category in the National Register. It's not just a discrete point on the map, it is the point in context. What's happening that causes this to be this way, to present this way. It's about a total 360-degree view, and I don't just mean northeast, west, and south, I mean looking up and looking down. You're in space, you're not on a flat plane. And a traditional cultural landscape tries to look at all of these influences through cultural eyes. So there's your approach. Fits into the National Park Service rubric, but with voices coming from somewhere else. So the Bellows Falls petroglyphs, Kchi Pôntegok, have been well documented, as I mentioned earlier. They're in the National Register already. Western eyes have seen them, they've recorded them, they've interpreted them with various degrees of accuracy or inaccuracy. Our earliest record, written record is David McClure, 1789. He was president at Dartmouth College, a little bit upriver, and he came down to take a peek at these Indian carvings, curious, looking at these through the eyes of a minister. He's a reverend. So he saw them with his own perspective. And he drew pictures of what he saw, and he shared these with the Reverend Ezra Stiles. You know that name, probably, through your work as Nira. President down at Yale, also interested in all matters. And the ministers of the day were the scholars of the day. So that's where we look for a lot of our early records. This is what David McClure said he saw. You'll see three faces here. There's more than three, but he just was suggesting the idea of multiples. Reading between the lines here, you can see a dotted outline to the right side. I don't know if the picture works for you in the back, but kind of suggests that maybe there's something else going on there. Didn't quite know what, but there's some dotted lines. You see rays coming out of the figure in the center. What's that all about? There's been a lot of interpretations about that. Maybe they're aliens. Ears, eyes, nose, mouth. Another depiction a little later, Western scholars. This is from a book by Benjamin Hall about Eastern Vermont, 1850s. Indian sculptures at Bellows Falls. You see a lot more heads here. You see some rays up here. We only see eyes and nose and mouths pretty much, so something's changed. Same drawings, different person. Tells you there's a little subjectivity involved here. There usually is. We heard that in the last presentation. That the observer matters as much as the observed. Another drawing, this is from an illustration by the work of Schoolcraft, another early anthropologist, well known, interpreted by Hamlin, his stenographer. A little bit more realistic here. The previous lithograph was kind of crude. And maybe that's all Benjamin could afford. I don't know. A little higher quality etching here. Interestingly enough, we realized, others have realized early on that this is reversed. He did this from a negative. And it doesn't actually look like this. So flip it left and right. But it's a pretty good depiction. Again, faces, some rays. All the way to the right, again, you can see an outline behind another face. So someone else picked up on that. There's other things here other than faces in this drawing. The other folks chose to leave them out. You see a lot of dots, what we might call cupules in the world of petroglyphs. There's an X. There's some other odd shapes up toward the top and the center. We've got, oh my goodness, a fertility symbol. We don't like to talk about that nowadays. There's Jerry Byron is a nearby artist who could put together a wonderful blog post about these petroglyphs if you go to look them up. Jerry Byron. An actual photograph here. I think this is from the work of Edward Hitchcock, geologist for the state of Massachusetts and the state of Vermont, professor down at the University of Massachusetts. He came up and took photographs. They chalked in, as is typical, the petroglyphs that they saw or they chose to emphasize. And you'll see that the foreground is a bunch of small rocks, but very approachable. The river itself is behind the ledge, behind that second ledge. It doesn't look like this nowadays. It's almost impossible to get down there because of industrial development. And the petroglyphs themselves are half buried under riprap. They haven't been treated well, but they're still there. I will mention that because of the riprap and the backfill, some of the petroglyphs are not visible. It also means they're preserved. They can't be tampered with. So let's start looking at this through Abenaki eyes. Indigenous people are the people of a place. That's the dictionary definition, the original people of a place. We focus on the people part a lot because we're people and we're quite full of ourselves. So we think about the people and the names of the indigenous people come to mind easily, the usual handful of whatever, Cherokee, Mohawk, Navajo, Dene, Abenaki, maybe even Pôntegok or Sakoki, if you know your regional people. We don't think about the place that they're from, which is what creates them. It's the place that creates them and their culture. All their cultures are different. They respond to the place that they're from, and the languages that they speak are different. Same causation. It's the language of the land. This is a map of the watershed of the mid-Connecticut River Valley, the Akiôtloka, running from Waranock, Agawam, that's down by Springfield. These are Abenaki names. Nanotok, Northampton. I'm coming up the map here, south to north. Kchi, the Great Beaver, Akiôtloka Ridge, Sugarloaf, Akiôtloka itself, which is Deerfield today, Peskiomskut, which a name I don't like to say. Very bad things happen there at the falls, Peskiomskut. Up to where Wantustokok is now, Fort Dummer, the first permanent British presence in what is now Vermont. Brattleboro. Suquequi, the land of the Suquequi people, centered on this area. This is all Suquequi. Kchi Pôntegok, what we're talking about tonight, Bellows Falls, and up toward the top, Kuwasak, around Haverhill, Newberry area on the river. Big red arrow, obvious, we're talking about Kchi Pôntegok here. This is the context on the river. It's all about the river, the water, the unifying characteristic here. Pulls us together. Water is life. We center ourselves on water. Abenaki people refer to their river, which is themselves, as Nsibu, my river. That's me. I am Wantustokok. We call it the West River today. We call it Wantustokok. So what we did was we commissioned a set of ArcGIS maps to depict what we were working on for this proposal, for amendment, for nomination. This is all part of the package we submitted to the National Park Service. And excuse me, what we have here is kind of zooming in on Bellows Falls. You can see there's a pointer on here somewhere, right there. Little swirly thing. That's where the falls are, where the petroglyphs are. And we're in the Rockingham area, Walpole to the east in New Hampshire, where we are. You're from the right side of the river and I'm from the wrong side? No. I'm from the better side. Rockingham, Charlestown, excuse me, that area. Just to the north, the Williams River comes in from the west. Just below the petroglyph, the Cold River comes in from Alstead and Walpole. And Saxton's River is coming in a little to the west there, down in Westminster. A lot of water coming in here. Okay, so watersheds. Indigenous people think of themselves in terms of the water that they live in. That is their water. And that's their boundaries, basically, for their territories. The height of land, wherever the water is coming from. If it flows toward you and that's where you live, you're responsible for that. So we're looking at the drainage that's feeding into Kchi Pôntegok here. That's our area of study. Archaeological sites from Western science perspective nearby. There's a couple on here. Down here, this is Wantustokok, petroglyph sites there, West River sites. Down here in West Swansea, the Whipple site, Dr. Bob Goodby's work with the fishing weir down there, and long presence. Again, Bob Goodby's work here at the Tennant Swamp site at the Keene Middle School, which is the oldest archaeological site for human habitation in northern New England. Goes back to 12,000 years. Bob Goodby did the needle and haystack archaeological thing there when they were doing testing before they built this middle school. Lo and behold, he found occupation sites from people hunting on the tundra in the Ashwillet River Valley. Ashwillet is a Benaki word. Aswalak, it means in the hollow place between. That talks about that very, very swampy place where Keene, New Hampshire is located. Headwaters of the Ashwillet. And then to the north, there's another one up here, Skitchewag, near Springfield on the river, Springfield, Vermont. Skitchewag, another Abenaki word, from Kitsiwatsu, big mountain. It's not a lot of archaeological sites, considering the degree and the long-standing indigenous presence. It doesn't mean they weren't there. It's kind of a little understood fact of archaeological density that, I'll give you an example. The Vermont state archaeologist, Jess Robinson, would be the first to say that the paucity of archaeological sites in the Pôntegok area or the mid-Connecticut Valley is no indication of who is there. It's because they didn't look, because there wasn't anybody developing the place. And 90% of the archaeological sites in the Vermont database are in Chittenden County, where Burlington is, because that's where the development is. So it's completely deceptive. Don't trust density as an indicator of anything that's driven by permitting, which is driven by dollars. So there isn't a lot here, but what there is significant. Petroglyphs at Pôntegok, the Tennant site, the oldest human occupation in the northern part of the Northeast, and Skichewag, another very, very important site, the oldest documented evidence for maize horticulture in the north. Maize, beans, squash, and tobacco were recovered from that spot. Okay, so using Abenaki culture, we're going to look at the world with a different worldview. These are different eyes, different cultures, different ways of being. All things are connected. They are not separated. They are connected. They're not in different boxes. They're all in the same box. Everything carries spirit. The spirit is moving all the time. It affects the way we should interact. We should move with respect. We should defer. We should recognize that the way we treat someone else is the way they're going to treat us back. It's just a different way of doing things. There are multiple layered worlds. There are many things happening all at the same time. We don't know all of them. We can't see all of them. Doesn't mean they're not happening. So again, it's this matter of paying attention and using respect. These worlds can be traversed. Spirit is always moving. Worlds can be crossed. They are liminal. We can move from the world we're in to a different world if you understand it, and that knowledge is slipping. Reality is subjective. Multiple explanations. There is no objectivity. I'm like, I got over it. I recognize that. I embrace it. There are many objectivities, you could say, because we all live through our own experience. We're humans. We live up here. What I see when I look at something is very different from what you see. It's colored by my upbringing. I'm a preacher's kid. I hope I'm forgiven because I'm no longer living that way. Not everything is visible. The invisible is just as valid and it is just as present. We are surrounded, literally, we're at Namaskik. We are surrounded by thousands and thousands of others here right now. Even if you can't see them, they're still here. I want to honor that. I went over and visited before I came inside. I've never been here to Namaskik. This is kind of cool. Creation is continual. It's another way of saying change is constant. Creation didn't happen with one bang, or it didn't happen in 1 week. It's happening all the time because change is constant and spirit is moving. We just change from one thing into another. Someday I will be dirt, and that will be an honor because something else will come from that. Spirit is in motion. It does not hold still. It's moving all the time. Our responsibility as human beings is to recognize that, to work with it, and try to stay in balance. It never stops. Entropy. Systems tend toward disorder. We have to have a little bit of input here and keep things in the middle. Not too much of a good thing, though. That's not a great idea either. So basically, Everything's changing all the time. It's all about relationship and connection, and that's what the petroglyphs are talking to us about. Little did that you might have known. I don't know. I'm going to try to share how that works. So specifically at this place, and I will point out that petroglyphs are a rather rare occurrence in the Northeast. Other places are a little more common, not so much in the Northeast. In what is, now the state of Vermont, borders being a construct, there are only 2 verified, genuine, 100% original petroglyphs, and the ones at Bellows Falls and the ones at Wontostegok in Brattleboro. All the others are somewhat suspect. I'm not going to discard them, but these are the 2 significant places. Interestingly enough, at both places, we see similar characteristics, and we see these in other places in the Northeast. The Northeastern woodland cultures, Algonquian speakers, responding through similar related cultures. When they see a certain thing happening, they recognize it. And if it's a particularly significant place, there may be petroglyphs there talking about it. The powerful place of falling water, similar to Namaskik. Petroglyphs here too. Whether they have never been found is irrelevant, or if they've been destroyed for industrial activity, likely as well. They're here. We may never see them again. Whirlpools, water spinning in a circle. You'll often see that at a waterfall, at rapids. Whirlpools are seen as an entrance to one of those other multiple worlds in which we live. It's the underworld. That's how you go down there. Lots of whirlpools at Kchi Pôntegok, and 1 whirlpool at Wontostegok. A steep mountain immediately adjacent to the falls, coming straight up out of the water. In the case of Bellows Falls, that is Fall Mountain, eponymous name. In Wontostegok, that is Wontostegok on the New Hampshire side. Anadromous fish runs, huge fish runs coming up to these places that would bring the people in to meet them. Birds of prey. For the fish, of course, for the thermals in the steep valley. Rattlesnakes. We don't think about this much nowadays. They used to be much more prevalent. But there are rattlesnakes at Kchi Pôntegok and at Wontostegok on the mountain. You see a similarity with the shape of a whirlpool. Direct symbolism. Thermal springs. Bellows Falls has got a hot spring. It's not hot, it's warm. But it's groundwater and it doesn't freeze. I only found out about this a couple of years ago. All the locals knew it. I didn't because I live 20 miles down the river. But what are you talking about? There's a thermal spring here. Yes, there is. Traditions, people have been going to these places for a long, long, long time. They're buried there. It's a very significant place. Multiple burials. They show up in the newspaper records over the last couple hundred years. That was the last one, ancestors. Travel routes, people traveling there to be at these places, to be with the ancestors, to meet the fish people, and all of these other things, places of great power, spirit coming and going in a very powerful manner. So as we went through this traditional cultural properties, traditional cultural landscape study approach, we came up with this phrase, ceremonial centers. It's not original, but it designates these places. Kchi Pôntegok in the center. They're sort of like the epicenters of their individual contexts, but working together. And Wontostegok at the bottom and up toward the top, Skichewag, has almost all of those same characteristics. 8 out of 10 are at Skichewag as well. And there are rumors of petroglyphs at Skichewag. I've read about them in the old histories. They're not very well described. I don't know if we'll ever be able to relocate them, but we're looking. One of the detail maps that we had in here, mapping out rattlesnake habitat, where rattlesnakes have been found historically. Lithic material sources for tool making. There's a pretty strong cluster of lithic sources in this area. This is the contextualization of these places that we were putting together to document that these are significant places, and that's why the petroglyphs are there. Okay, back to Hitchcock. Edward Hitchcock, 1866, the photograph in the Peabody Museum, Kchi Pôntegok. The faces have been highlighted a little bit here, and some other things have not. You can see some of the cupules have not been highlighted. Someone actually put a date there of 1791. A previous visitor, Western, had to leave his own personal mark, because that's what Westerners do. Another series of cupules over here and a shape around it, a grid work. But basically untouched, eroded but untouched. This is what Edward Hitchcock saw in 1866. Now the predominant aspect, symbol here, are what we would call the face, the faces. Again, 2 eyes and a mouth. A whole bunch of them. Who are these people? Well, they're seen in other places as well. So you start to see that there's a pattern here. There's a theme. It's not something that folks who were visiting Kchi Pôntegok just decided to do in the moment. They were responding out of their cultural knowledge to what they saw there. This is a great illustration from a narrative of the captivity and adventures of John Tanner, who was a U.S. Working for the U.S. government as an interpreter at Sault Ste. Marie. During his 30 years residence among the Indians in the interior of North America, 1830. Books had long titles back then. Lots of subtitles, and subtitles were the subtitles. But this is a pretty good record here. John Tanner met people who were still fully immersed in their culture and practicing it. And he recorded some of what he saw from when he was in the place and talking with the people of the place. And this is how he described this. The figures are numbered, and talking about number 18, or number 17, again, a face, 2 eyes and a mouth. He says, he tells us who this is, according to his informants. This is the Manatu of the ground, who puts only his head above the surface to speak. In this figure, his horns are omitted. See, he knew about horns or rays, perhaps by mistake. Manatu, you've heard that word before. Mayborn dicks, of course, right? Usually translated as spirit. In Abenaki, we don't use the word Manatu, we use the word Ondu. Same word, enunciated a little different. Ondu, that is Ondu. Ondu is spirit. It's an evocation of spirit, an entity, an embodiment of spirit. There are Ondu everywhere. This is an Ondu of the ground. They live down in this world. They hold a great deal of knowledge. The earth is the source of everything. You can think of the earth as your teacher. As a matter of fact, in Abenaki, the word that we use for teaching is Aki. Excuse me, brain just slipped here. But it translates as knowledge is held in the earth. But that's our word for teaching. We recognize that knowledge comes from the earth first, and we just interpret it. So Ondu is down there. Ondu sometimes comes up to talk to us, puts his head above the surface to speak, to start a conversation. I'm talking to you. If you're civil, if you're not disrespecting or ignoring me, you'll speak back to me. We'll have a conversation. We'll figure some things out. So when Ondu speaks, you listen and you speak back. the conversation. And here is Ondo is showing up out in the Great Lakes again. We heard about Dighton Rock just a few minutes ago. Over on the right edge of Dighton Rock, we see Unduak again, multiple Ondu, face, two eyes, and a mouth. Isaac Greenwood's drawing from 1830 at the Taunton River. Skipping up to what is today Ontario, Canada, Petroglyph Provincial Park, the Peterborough petroglyphs, the Cree word. Somebody want to pronounce that? Kinumagawapkong, the teaching rocks. Again, the earth, bedrock. The earth is speaking, is teaching us. This is up in Ontario, again, Algonquian cultures. And finally, it's a little fuzzy. This is underwater, under very late light, silty conditions, but this is down at Wantastagok, Brattleboro. Annette Spalding, the master scuba diver, relocated this drawing, which had only been reported once before. Basically, people didn't even know it existed. It showed up in the newspaper in Brattleboro in the 1970s. Did not show up in the historical record anywhere before then. Somebody happened to see it in the 70s when the water was low. And she stumbled on it by accident when she was looking for the main petroglyph panel, which she did locate a couple of years later. They're underwater, 15 feet down, because of the building of the Vernon Dam, 1909. They haven't been seen for 120 years almost, until Annette relocated them. But she took this picture. This is a single face. Face there, eye, mouth, and very faintly, projections on the top. Ondu shows up again, facing west, where the spirits go, facing west. 2015. So I just want to kind of like do a deep dive to make a really bad pun. Why the face is just two eyes and a mouth? You'll think back to David McClure's picture, which had ears and a nose. There are no ears or nose. Mr. McClure wanted to see them. That's what made him comfortable. Faces are supposed to have ears and noses. So he put them on his picture, but they're not there. Ondu has two eyes and a mouth, no ears and no nose. Odd. All right, here's my thoughts on this. They're not completely original. You look at my face, got all the usual appurtenances here. The nose and the ears are here. Following traditional practice as I have been taught, I am wearing ornamentation here. I'm wearing ornamentation here. This is not just for looks, although I enjoy it. These items, which are evocative of affirming beneficial spirit, because they are light colored and shiny light. They represent light, whether that is what you would call wampum, quahog shells, silver. These are protective. It's a cultural practice. They are protecting the orifices on my head. I need my head. This is where most of my senses are coming in, and I'm a human being. I live up here. They're protecting the orifices that I cannot close. They're wide open. I am porous in that respect, and I need to pay attention to what I take in. You know, garbage in, garbage out, that idea. You are what you take in. And I can't control that a whole lot, although I have a degree of will that comes into this. I can make choices, but I need to be aware that things are coming in all the time. And in Beneke sense, that would be mostly spirit. There is spirit coming at me all the time, and it will affect me. It will affect me. And I need to pay attention. However, my eyes and my mouth, also holes in my head, I'm porous, closed. I can decide to close it. You're talking to me as Ondu is doing. His mouth is open. Their mouth is open. I can choose to not talk back. I can choose to not engage, to not be in conversation. However, Ondu is asking me to be in conversation. Pay attention here. You need to learn some things. Similarly with my eyes, I have discretion here. I can look at you. You can look at me, or I can close my eyes. You're gone. I'm disregarding you now. Ondu's eyes are open. Ondu is looking at you. Look back. Pay attention. What does Ondu want to tell you? That's a lifetime of learning, understanding what you're being told. And this is what I believe these faces, that's why these faces are depicted this way, with open eyes and open mouth and no nose and no ears. But entities that have a lot to tell us. And they're at these places because there's a great deal of spirit. I don't have time to get into all of that. There's a lot to do with the fact that there's falling water, there's a lot of energy, there are whirlpools going into the underworld, there's a steep mountain going up to the sky world. All of these things are coming together and becoming one thing. And you go there to participate. Very simply. And your ancestors have been doing that for thousands of years as well, because they knew that too. And you carry that knowledge forward. It's good to remember. Mikwalda. It's good to remember. You don't know where you're going unless you know where you've come from. So we need to know these things. It is 10 of. We can take a few questions. I will get my slides here wrapped up. Liwani, thank you. Nidombak, my friends. Down here at the bottom is the nonprofit organization that I operate called Atawi. Atawi is a Benaki word that means this is super cool. Together in time and space. What a cool word. Some languages have words for things that we do not have words for. And English likewise, right? It's a worldview. It's a way of being in place. So I appreciate that word, Atawi. This is our landing page, atawi.org. And I think that's it. Yep, cool. So questions? I need to pick? All right. We'll start on the left.
Yeah, the site that I'm familiar with is Pole Hill. It's a ceremonial landscape that has an astronomical observatory to it. But one of the features that I run across over and over is splits in both the bedrock. It's an upland heath that has not a lot of big vegetation. So the bedrock is very close to the surface of the exposed in many places. And those splits will have stones in them and splits in other boulders.
Mm.
How do you interpret that? Can you give us some insight on that?
Sure. I can speak to that to the degree that I'm familiar with it. I don't profess to know everything, right? I see the splits in the boulders as cognates, similar to the whirlpools. They're an entrance to worlds beneath, where other ones are sources of spirit and power. Stones placed in those fissures or cracks, I see as acknowledgements. They're brought by people who see that place for what it is, and they want to mark it with respect. Not necessarily a blocking. You can't stop spirit. you can acknowledge it. And I think we all appreciate when we are acknowledged rather than when we are ignored. These are living beings, and some places are more permeable than others. Yes.
Yeah. This isn't, bear with me. My ancestors came to Vermont from Rhode Island in 1772. I would imagine they followed the Connecticut River up, but I feel so ignorant of what was going on when he got there. You know, they had to create shelter and find a way to make a living, but there were people here already. Apparently.
For 12,000 years.
And I wasn't taught about that in Vermont elementary schools. We were told Vermont was a traveling ground and nobody lived here.
Right.
Except along the Onion River, I suppose, up north. So now we know differently, or you help me know different. But so who might they have encountered on the trip up the Connecticut River? Or would anybody who lived here already just stay in the woods and not make themselves known? How did that work?
Yeah, there's a whole lot that we were not told.
Yeah.
That's simply a reflection of the fact we were not told. That was the conventional narrative. Vermont history textbooks taught that there were no native people in Vermont. It was simply people passing through. That was printed in the book in black and white in English, not in Abenaki. And because that was the way they wanted to tell that story. And we still deal with the reality, the fallout of that today, trying to convince people that almost none of that is true. So who would your ancestors have encountered traveling up the Connecticut, the main highway, the way in from the south? They would have encountered all Algonquian speakers, languages similar to the Abenaki. As you worked your way up through, you would meet folks with the names of the places that we see on that Abenaki map earlier: Pocumtuck, Nonotuck, the Sokoke people, the Wantastikok, getting granular, the Wantastikok, the Kchi Pôntegok people, all referred to by the place where they live. As a historic observation, the Abenaki, at least in the interior, were almost always allied with the French to the north rather than the English to the south. Many of the native folks further south had no choice. They were surrounded. So they either joined up or went away or met some other ignominious end. To the north, the Abenaki were allied with the French. When things got tough, they tended to move north, and many Abenaki did. There are 2 Abenaki reserves in Quebec to this day, federally recognized by the Canadian government. Those are folks from the diaspora from all over New England, and they ended up hanging on to that name Abenaki there, although the folks there are from all over the place. The Abenaki homelands cover a very, very wide area, all the way from Lake Champlain over to basically the Kennebec, western Maine, and down to the Massachusetts border and over a little bit, actually into Massachusetts. Huge, huge homeland, but mostly allied with the French, or uneasy relationships, neutral even with the English. So by the time the English flooded up the Connecticut River Valley from points south, keep in mind that virgin epidemics had removed about 90% of the indigenous population. So it was depopulated, not by choice. And if they met anyone further north, they would have been Abenaki or people from further south who were also displaced and decided to go to a place of relative safety. King Philip's War, the massacre at the Great Falls down there in Montague, was a massacre by colonial militia of mostly refugees from further south, Narragansett and Wampanoag, who had come up to be with the Abenaki because they knew it was still untouched and relatively safe. And the history of Vermont is in English records is almost missing completely. The English knew nothing. It was over the frontier. They didn't know what was going on up there.